Welcome to another episode of An Unexpected Fight with your host, Tiffany and Kelly. We're excited to be here today. And Kelly, why don't you tell us who we're talking to today?
All right. So today we are very excited to have Steve Garraty as our guest today. So Steve was diagnosed with cancer at 18, and after enduring a year of hell, he did not let his experience define him. Instead, he used it as a catalyst to live with greater intention, purpose, and gratitude. His journey led to the creation of his new book called Greatfruit: How Cancer Led to Living a More Fruitful Life. Today, Steve is an advocate for embracing life with glass half full mindset, empathy, and gratitude. His story has shaped how he's led in business, raised two children, and been a husband for over 30 years. So please welcome joining us, Steve. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kelly and Tiffany. Excited to be here.
So, tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write Grapefruit. What was the process like? How did COVID kind of play a role in that journey and your book writing?
Yeah, so the book started really as a journal when I was going through chemotherapy. Parents, again, I was 18 and was living at home, and my parents suggested that I start a journal to, as a kind of a form of therapy. And so that's how it started. And then once I was in remission, I went off to college and I kind of put that aside. I didn't want to think about cancer for years. And once somewhat removed, I started writing again in my mid 20s. Once I had children, I thought it'd be great to leave them my story and some of the lessons by then that I had felt like I had gained from my experience with cancer. And then eventually I felt like I had a story that would help more than just my children, and decided I wanted to create a book. So that whole process has been, I like to joke, it's been 37 years, but majority of that time I was putting it down, raising kids, traveling, and every once in a while I'd pick it up, spend a little bit of time on it. But it took me 37 years to complete it.
Awesome. Wow, that's dedication.
Uh,
So, you mentioned the idea of turning adversity into purpose. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, and I think part of your question there, Tiffany, was about COVID. COVID for me was, which I will answer your question, Kelly. COVID was a reminder, I think, of a lot of the themes in my book. A lot of what we experienced with COVID, that life is short, spending time with family, with friends. I think COVID was a universal event that had similar lessons to what cancer provided. But yeah, I think as far as what cancer did for me, to back up a little bit, in high school, I was not a good kid. I was on a bad path. My last couple of years in high school, I was drinking way too much. I was blacking out, drinking liquor. I started experimenting with drugs and was just headed down a really bad path. And so, one, cancer was a wake up call for me, and it put me on a different path and put an end to all that. And then two, it just taught me a lot. The family and friends that stood by me during the experience, the value of that, I think, has affected me long term. It created a lot of empathy just going through that experience because I was shown so much empathy. And then gratitude. I'm forever grateful to many of the heroes in my journey and the role that they played. And so I try to do that for others. And those are probably just a few of the benefits that I experienced.
I
I
love
love
that.
that. I feel like you're kind of explaining how cancer shaped you to help kind of bring you into the person that you are now. How has that affected your life in general, your leadership, how you treat your family?
Yeah, I for me, when you're a teenager, my whole world revolved around parties. My social circle shrunk dramatically when I heard the word cancer. And, I think cancer still scares people today, but back then it was even scarier. I think it meant more of a death sentence back then. And so most teenagers didn't want to deal with it or be around it. So my social circle really, really shrunk. And I think that I'm always will always be appreciative to my family and then friends and people really, quite frankly, I didn't expect that stood up and stood by me. I was the worst. I apologize to my parents and my two siblings all the time for what a rotten teenager I was, and the fact that my parents did what parents do and kind of rallied around me and kind of forgot everything I put them through. Not forgot, but put aside everything that I had put them through for a couple years, just taking me to all of my appointments, doing everything for me during that 9 or 10 months that I went through chemo. It just, I will forever be grateful for that. And so I think as a business leader, I always try to lead with gratitude. I appreciate the people that work for me or support. I'm in sales. And so anybody that supports our efforts with what we're doing on a day to day basis, I try to show gratitude for that. And then I also try to show empathy. And I think that comes out in the ways that I listen and manage and coach and try to impact people's lives. I feel like in my role as a sales leader, it's my responsibility to help people reach a level of success in their life, professionally and personally. And I try to play a role in that. And a lot of that ties back to what I felt like people did for me during my worst point in life.
That makes sense a lot. And I think that whether you're a cancer survivor in your young adulthood or very young, that theme of empathy, I think, is definitely prominent. So, my daughter, who's a survivor, is only in kindergarten, but and she's a feisty little thing. But the one thing that people always compliment me on, including her teacher, is if there's another child who's not feeling well or they forgot to hand that person a juice box during the class party, my daughter's the first one to recognize that empathy. And I think it's because of everything she's been through, because she's not perfect. She's a feisty little kid, but she definitely is a lot more empathetic, I feel like, than I see in other children her age group. So it's kind of neat to see that not only for you who was a teenager, and honestly, let's face it, teenagers sometimes have a hard time finding that empathy in general,
Very.
all the way down to a young toddler who had gone through it. So, how did you cultivate these mindsets during treatment and during the most difficult of times? Because staying empathetic and having that mindset must have been very difficult during treatment.
Yeah, I don't know that a lot of the kind of the values that came from cancer did I recognize them or realize them while I was going through it. I think at the time I was just trying to survive, and I think most cancer patients, when you're going through cancer and treatment, you don't know when the end is, right? So I would go in for CAT scans and X-rays, but I never really knew when it was going to stop. I just knew that the drugs are working, you're improving. And so I think I was just trying to survive when I was going through that. And subconsciously, I saw what my family did and what my friends did. There was a pivotal point for me, and it was about 6, 7 months after I finished treatment. I had gone off to college and I was going home for Christmas break. And a friend of mine asked me, "Have you ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life?" And I said, no, it was an old black and white movie that I always just passed when I was flipping channels. And so he highly recommended it. And I went home and watched that movie over the first Christmas post chemo. And today it's my favorite movie. I watch it several times every year. But the themes in that resonated, that you had somebody have y'all seen the movie?
I did
Mhm.
when I was little.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have somebody that's taking life for granted, taking the blessings for granted, always kind of looking at the glass half empty, and he wishes he was dead or had never been born, actually. And he's granted that wish by an angel. And then the second half of the movie, he really sees kind of the value of his life and the impact that he's had on others. And when I saw that movie, I think I started to look back on my experience with cancer in that kind of same regard. Like, how could cancer be a blessing for me, and what were some of the ways that it changed me? And then over time I just continued to, there's really not a day that goes by that I don't think about my experience with cancer, even though I'm 36 years whatever removed from it. And so I just always try to think about the experience and how I can be better and grow from it. So
That's
it was
awesome.
it was that movie that really put me on that path. I know, it's a lot of weight to put in one movie, but it did really change my perspective.
Well, I think sometimes these older movies have better plots and
Then the current
teachable
ones.
moments. Yeah, a little bit better teachable moments in some of those older classic movies. You talked about through your journey how that was difficult, and how do you feel like your support system was through this. Was it family, friends, community? I know you talked a little bit about how you didn't have some of the friends that you thought you might have. I feel like all of that's so different than you would expect, especially being a mom who's suffered. My daughter suffered with a brain tumor and passed away, and there was people that were there for us, and then people I expected to be there weren't. And so just talk a little bit about how your support was through your journey.
Yeah, well, I guess I would start with my friends and social life. When the surgeon called our house, my family was all waiting around for this phone call to find out. They took a mass out of my neck the size of a grapefruit, which led to the title of the book. But when they took it out, he called the next day to tell us that I had cancer. The reaction of every person in my family, so I have two younger siblings, and my parents, everyone was different. And I write about this in my book, that it really hit me. And I think that was a moment of empathy in itself, that I felt bad for my parents, and I had put them through this hell the last couple of years with all the trouble I had gotten into. And so I watched each person's reaction. But my reaction was, I was devastated, because on that call, the surgeon said no drinking for the next year. And that's what I was upset about. Honest truth, I was devastated by that. And so the surgeon's talking and continues to talk, and my head starts spiraling, like, what do you mean no drinking? It's all I did every day. That's not an exaggeration. Every single day at that point in my life, I was drinking and going out and living for parties, and was set to go off to college. But my family just sat around the table, and that was kind of the first response. And then obviously the four of them were phenomenal during that year. And then my friends at the time all went off to college, and most of them didn't want to deal with that or spend time with a cancer patient. But I had two friends that really stuck by me that year and just went above and beyond. I mean, I had one, he was in, both of these two gentlemen were in my wedding, and I was in their wedding. But one of them, we got into a stupid fight, 18-year-olds, about something really dumb. And he continued to pick me up every day, drive me to classes. I was going to a community college, taking a light load. And then I was also working part time. So he would drive me to school, and he would drive me to work, and we weren't talking, we weren't speaking. And these two guys drove me to a chemotherapy session one time. My parents and I were fighting a little bit, and they took me to one of my chemo treatments. So those two were angels. And then there was a nurse that just went above and beyond the call of duty, and was just phenomenal. And we became friends over the course of a good portion of that treatment process. But I would say those four in my family, two friends, the nurse, I would say those seven were probably the ones who stood up the most. And there was extended family. But yeah, just, people like that. Tiffany, to your point, sometimes the reactions of who steps up in those situations and who doesn't will surprise you for sure.
Your circle may have gotten smaller, but it became the core people, the people you needed. I think you learned through this experience, whether you're the patient yourself or it's your child, that you really learn who you can lean on and who you can't. And your circle, I think, does get smaller for most people. Tiffany and I have interviewed quite a few cancer families. You're not alone there. They all say the same thing. They lost a lot of friends, but they gained some new ones too. And, it changes your mindset, like you said, too. You become a more empathetic person. You have more appreciation. I know for me, I don't sweat the small stuff like I used to. I'm sure you can attest to that. Things you used to stress about, like, oh no, I can't drink now. That's no longer an issue. I'm sure you learned from that experience.
I did.
All right, so let's talk about the book. First of all, I'm very excited. So I've already read a couple chapters, and I would be farther ahead if I didn't have two small children and a career and a very busy schedule. But I am excited to read more because it's very well written, and I'm already drawn into your story. So Grapefruit explores some powerful themes. Can you talk about what are some key moments in the book that readers have found most inspiring?
Yeah. I had a lady who worked for me for a long time. She said it was Breakfast Club meets It's a Wonderful Life. And And obviously, I mentioned the movie "It's a Wonderful Life" in there, so that probably played a role. But I thought that was a good analogy or example. But yeah, I guess the themes, and there's definitely a coming of age, right? So a troubled teenage boy that becomes a man and grows from this experience with cancer. I think it also sheds a very vulnerable, raw experience or sharing of an experience of what it's like going through chemotherapy at that age. And then, really, part two in the book is really how it impacted me long term and how it affected the way, as you mentioned up front, that I manage and lead people in business. I've been married for over 30 years. And like you, Kelly, I'm far from perfect. You said your child, but I'm far from perfect. But I do think a lot of the ways that I do approach my wife and our marriage is impacted by my experience. And then the way that, I raise my two kids, I never take anything for granted. I really try to every day think about my blessings, and I try to view life as with a glass half full mentality. So
I
those
think
those
that's
would be
so
some of the
important.
key themes. I'm sorry.
I think that's so important for anyone really, is to have your mindset, how you think about your life on a day-to-day basis. We all have troubles, we all have these hardships that we have to go through, but just trying to look at the bright side, trying to see the positives through the negatives, that's so important. And in your book, you talked about paying it forward. So, how has that been important in your life since your cancer journey started?
Yeah, I think for one, Tiffany, I think it's the reason I'm in management and leadership. And so early on, I went into sales right after college, and early on, I was always, and not many salespeople do this. Salespeople usually are very individualistic. They are focused on their own goals, and a lot of great salespeople don't make great sales managers. But I enjoyed helping the new person that would start. I enjoyed that process. And again, I think a lot of that, I wasn't like that at all. I was a selfish teenager, self absorbed, worried about myself. That was it. And so I think that experience with cancer kind of put me in that mindset where I really enjoyed and was passionate about helping other people. And so I think that led me to the career. I've been in leadership roles now for 20 plus years. I think it led me in that direction. And then, and even if people reach out to me, I help a lot of folks with resume and LinkedIn and interviews and some of those areas that I feel like I'm really strong in. I have friends and people that I may have met in the past and not even worked with closely that reach out. I just love helping from that perspective, and I'll always try to take the time to help somebody when they're asking. And then I think, the reason I met both of you, I've been involved for 16, 17 years with the National Pediatric Cancer Foundation, kind of for me, an easy organization to get passionate about because they're focused on pediatric cancer and research and minimizing or helping kids with the side effects from chemotherapy and radiation. I felt like the side effects that I went through were brutal, and probably most of all, it wore me down. I think the mental aspect of going through a cancer journey is the mental part is worse than the physical. So that was really tough. And so knowing that there's been a lot of progress made on that, but a lot more needs to be made, I'm very passionate about the National Pediatric Cancer Foundation. I'm based in Tampa. I had a couple friends who were on the board there and told me about the organization a long time ago. And originally, I did a cut for the cure, and that's how I got started working with them.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We'll talk about some other fundraising ways to get involved and whatnot here in just a little, but I want to keep talking a little bit about your book. And before I ask this next question, I already have some ideas for it because I get a lot of families reach out to me. So I'm the health navigator with NPCF, and I get a lot of families reach out to me looking for resources. Sometimes they need help finding trials, but other times it's simple financial resources. Or recently, I actually did have somebody ask me if there was any books that kind of talk about a cancer journey. And I have a list of books for the younger children. So a lot of picture books talking about what it means to have cancer. Some of them are specific to, your 5, 6, 7 year olds or their siblings, and kind of going over. But until now, I really didn't have a great recommendation for like the teenagers, or like we call them in the medical field your AYA. It's kind of your like young adult, still in the pediatric cancer realm, but kind of becoming an adult still. And they get left out a lot, if you want to know the truth, as far as a population goes, because they're in that gray space where they're battling a cancer that is typically more of a childhood cancer. However, they are an adult, technically speaking, 18, 19-year-olds. And so these resources that we have for kids, these picture books and these young adults, they don't want to look at those. That's not helpful. The toys that the child life specialists come in with, it's fabulous for your young kids. So I'm excited to be able to share Grapefruit with that population, because just the first couple chapters, I was like, wow, I feel like a young adult battling cancer could really relate to this, and this could really help them. So that leads to my next question. How do you hope that Grapefruit will impact your readers, particularly those who may be going through their own challenges?
Yeah, the book comes out March 11th, and I used Kickstarter. It's a platform for, raising funds and doing like an early release of a product or book or record or whatever it is you're trying to put out there. And so I've got about 200 readers, I guess, that friends and family that purchased the book. One of the interesting things is there's two ladies that both read the book who both lost their spouse. And these two ladies are too young to be losing their spouse, but they lost their spouse. And the book really impacted them and really resonated with them, I think, a lot of the themes. And so for me, it kind of opened up my eyes a little bit that the themes in the book and how it can help somebody is not even just for, for cancer patients or people who have been through cancer, but really any major life setback, trauma, tragedy. But, my hope with this book, when I went from leaving it as a story to my kids to sharing it with the world, I guess, or sharing it with a lot more people, was to help people with, I'd say number one is perspective and how you view that experience. It's easy to get mad. It's easy to, I talk a lot about this in the book, of it's easy to go down the why me path and feel like a victim when you're going through any experience like that, where you have one of life's big curveballs thrown at you. And I did that. I was guilty as anybody of why me, and I was angry, and I would get frustrated. But I think over the course of that year, it sounds cliche, but I started thinking, why not me? There's a lot of ways that the cancer helped me and turned my life around. And so, yeah, I think that's my hope, is that it helps people with perspective and putting them in a position where they're more open to grow and learn from those types of experiences in life.
It's
I
incredible.
love that. So, in your book, you also reference about going through this year of hell. What advice would you give somebody that's going through their own personal year of hell?
It was rough. I would say one is to figure out who those people are that are stepping up for you, that we talked about earlier, and lean into them. Your network of people that kind of establish themselves, I guess, once you are going through something like that, is really important. I would say that's biggest. If you are somebody of faith, I think I leaned into my faith a lot. I actually was in a spot where I really wasn't close to God, and had, again, based on the trouble and kind of the path that I was headed down. There's an experience, a chapter in the book where I talk about going to see a priest, and I'll kind of leave it at that. But it really impacted me, and it changed my relationship with God. I think it's very natural when we're going through something traumatic and awful in our lives to be drawn closer to God. And I always try to remind myself not to be that person that just does it when I need something and when I'm in a bad way. And I think going through cancer and developing a spiritual relationship over that time with God has stuck with me, and I've tried to maintain that.
It's beautiful. So going back to fundraising, because we know you are involved with the National Pediatric Cancer Foundation, at what point did you decide that you wanted to use your platform and fundraise and support cancer research?
I mentioned I did a couple Cut for the Cures. My son he's grown now and has his own house. But when he was about 11 or 12, he did Cut for the Cure with me. And we raised, I think it was over $17,000 as a team. And it was easy. I shouldn't say it was easy. It was a lot easier, using my son was shaving his head. And I know I'm bald now, but I had hair at the time.
I wasn't going to make a comment. I was about to say what cut, but
Yeah, no, I had hair and I would shave it a couple times. But then I got involved with some committees. I did, I don't know that they still do this, but the Brenner, the breakfast dinner fundraiser they used to do. And I just think they're a great organization. So yeah, I try to get involved with them and promote them. I'm doing a book launch party here in Tampa for friends and family. They're going to come and speak at that. And have a table there and bring awareness. But like I said earlier, it's for me, it's a no-brainer. It's what they do and their mission. I couldn't have picked, I think, a better charity for me to be involved with because of what they do and who they're helping.
well, just as well as anybody going through it, how important the research part of it is. We need to find better treatment options. And like you said, that treatment was harsh on your body. It was awful and it was, terrible. And unfortunately, the same drugs you were given, we're still using on young kids. I think when I first found out my daughter's protocol, and I was like, wait a minute, that drug's been around since the 50s and that one since the 50s. And I was kind of mind blown that we're still using these because the research, even though we've made some really big leeway in the past decade, we still need to do better and find, I think, less toxic medications so that you don't feel just as awful as you felt going
Yeah,
through that.
yeah, and I think they still come with long-term effects, right?
They do. 95% of all survivors will have some sort of long-term side effect.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. When I was diagnosed in 1986. And I'll never forget the oncologist telling me that prior to 19, I would have told you to get your affairs in order. And there was no cure. And so, yeah, I think we have a long way to go. But, sometimes I look at the progress we've made and feel very thankful that I got it when I did and not prior to 1970. But yeah, the sorry, I can't even.
Toxicities.
Yeah, thank you. Of the medications are just brutal on the body. And I think hopefully one day we find a cure. But until then, I think they've got to continue to make progress on what it does to the body.
Yep,
Absolutely.
we had to. Well, I shared this week on my foundation page about a little girl who passed away from a stroke related to prior treatments. She beat her cancer and then died at 4 years old from a stroke. And so, yeah, like to your point, these are just reasons why we have to get better treatments, and your involvement with NPCF is crucial to that, really, funding new research and different ways that we can support one another. We have worked with the National Pediatric Cancer Foundation with my organization, and will continue to do so to help, bring about some of this new research. So thank you so much for your involvement with this, just to help the ones who haven't been diagnosed yet. That's always my kind of standing point is I know it doesn't help my daughter at this point, but I hope someday that some parent doesn't have to hear the same words I did.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
how has your personal experience shaped your interest in fundraising and advocacy?
Yeah. I think a lot of the stats that NPCF shares as far as the lack of funding and the lack of awareness surprised me because when I went through it, obviously I was going through my experience but I was even, I don't know, 15 years ago, I was kind of clueless to some of those challenges for pediatric cancer and the lack of money that goes to it. And so I think that's important. I know that, again, going back to empathy, I know that the impact that the drugs had on me, I always, my worst fear was something happening to one of my two children. It still is, but anytime in fact, my son even one time had like a swollen lymph node, and mine started with a mass on the side of my neck. And I freaked out. Like I always said that would be worse than, and I feel for both of you, that would be worse than what I went through, that I would go through what I went through for the rest of my life to avoid my children having to go through that. To that point, when I was going through what I went through, I always felt like even as a snotty, selfish teenager, I always thought that it was rougher on my parents than it was on me. Even though I was the one puking and I was the one who lost my hair and going through all that, I always thought it was worse on my parents than it was on me. So I would say those are some of the reasons, Tiffany, why I'm passionate about it. And I think awareness needs to be brought to it. And I mean, there's nothing more heartfelt, or not heartfelt, but pulling on your heartstrings than seeing a child with cancer.
Absolutely. Now that you've kind of gotten it out there and you've shared your personal story, with the book, and I'm sure doing other interviews and kind of just opening up about it, have you found that people connect differently as far as a fundraising effort goes? Because anybody can put on a fundraiser, but to have that story to back it, do you feel like people, the more you've been open about it, do you feel like people have connected more?
It's probably too early to say that, Kelly, because I just did this Kickstarter, so it's basically been like a pre-release.
Okay.
I have always felt like my a lot of people in my network have been very generous when I do fundraising for NPCF. I usually will tell my story or put out a blurb about, as a cancer survivor, as, having gone through 9, 10 months of chemo. And when I share that, I've always found people, at least in my network, family, friends, even sometimes people I'm not close with, have stepped up and contributed. I think where the challenge is I have found, like, doing that year over year over year, people get a little burnout on maybe contributing to the same charity. So I can only imagine, for like Dave, the president at NPCF, it's got to be a challenge getting people to kind of re-up or donate every single year. But from a book standpoint, I've so far people are still reading it and they're still kind of going through it. And if anything, I'm just getting a lot of, like, I had no clue about this about you, or I had no idea that you were
Hmm.
Yeah.
such a little jerk in high school. It's been more of that. But like I said, our launch party is coming up in April, and PCF will be there. And so I think there'll be more opportunities for that moving forward.
We'll have to do a part two. Something tells me, now that you've released it and you've shared something very intimate and personal to you and your journey and your life, that those efforts will increase. I think people, when, it is hard sometimes. And I never tell a cancer family like, oh, you should openly share your story, because everybody processes and copes differently. But I will say, sharing your personal story, the good and the bad, Tiffany's really amazing at that, sharing the hurt and the pain. It sometimes is beneficial. It does sometimes, I think, lead to people saying, oh my God, I need to step up. I need to do something about this.
Yeah, I did have a couple friends. I'm just thinking through, I've gotten so many different reactions, but I did have a couple friends say, like, I knew cancer was bad. I knew you went through cancer, but I had no idea my first chapter starts off where, I was at my rock bottom, and I did reach a point where I thought about just quitting doing chemo. Like, I didn't think I could physically do it anymore. And I had kind of a mental breakdown, at least I view it that way. And he read that and just said that he was really moved, I guess, and he was able to, I guess, empathize more with what it might be like going through that, because I feel like I was pretty raw and vulnerable in what I share in the book, to the point where my wife kept saying, are you sure you want to put this out in the world? Are you sure you want to put this out in the world? But one of my friends from college, one of the kind of toughest guys I knew in college, and kind of macho guy. But he told me he cried reading the book. And so for me, that was probably the best endorsement I've gotten so far, because, I think, to your point, it's getting people to kind of empathize and realize and maybe be a little bit more knowledgeable on what cancer can do to a child.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, Kelly knows I don't shy away from the hard stuff about sharing what's really hard and the hell that we live through, because I think that change doesn't happen until people see the real process of what it's like to have a child live through chemotherapy, and or not live through it. That's unfortunate part of it, is a lot of these kids don't survive the treatments because they're so harsh. So I applaud you for sharing those tough times, because they really do resonate with people. I can't tell you how many people message me and go, thank you for sharing that. I thought I was all alone in this feeling that I'm having about grief or about this trial that I'm going through. And it really does give people a voice to hear other than their own head going, I'm the only one who's ever lived through this. So thank you for writing that. That's amazing that you've done this. So what's next though? More books, speaking engagements, projects, what you got going on in the future?
I hope all of the above. I've got a full-time sales leadership job, and so I've been doing this. My kids are out of the house, so it's my wife owns her own business, and so we're usually both sitting on our laptops, on the couch in the evening, and then on the weekend I don't golf or fish. So it's been all about getting this book out. But yeah, I have some speaking engagements that were part of the Kickstarter program that I'll be doing this summer. I'm hoping to speak to more folks about it. A lot of interviews, as you mentioned earlier. So just trying to get the word out there. I do have some ideas for future books. I don't know, they'll probably always have a flavor of my experience with cancer in them, but they're different topics. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Love it.
Awesome. Well, how can people support your work, whether reading Grapefruit, where can we find it when it's launched, or contributing to your fundraising efforts?
Yeah, I think so. On March 11th, the book is out on Grapefruit, and I have to spell it because sometimes it sounds like grapefruit, but it's
Grapefruit,
GR.
yeah.
Yeah, like the word great and then fruit, but it's all one word. It's on Amazon, and primarily that's where I'll be selling it originally. And then they can also go to my website and read more about my story and see some of the interviews like this, and that is stevegarraty.com, GARRATY.com.
Awesome. Tiffany's techie, so she'll leave all of that in our comments too. So
Awesome.
we'll
Yes.
have
Make
after our
sure
blog.
everybody knows how to get to you. So if you can leave the listeners with one final message about resilience, purpose, making a difference, whatever you want to make it, what would that be?
I'm stealing this from Charles Swindoll, but it's life is 10% what happens to us and 90% how we respond. And I would say, regardless of what you're going through, have the resilience and persistence to get through it. But at some point, try to have a mindset where you can learn and grow from it. Because I think, regardless of what we go through, and it's not a question of if, we're all going to have something or multiple things that are bad that happen in our lives. But I do think there's an opportunity for growth in every single one of those. And you have to be open to it and not get bitter and hardened by the experience, but really be open to growing and transforming and being a better person and impacting others because of your experience.
Well, Steve, I think we're very kindred spirits in that. Um, you just have to keep going, get up every day and put one foot in front of the other. And sometimes that's all you can do is think about that next step. But we're so thankful to have had you on the podcast today. I hope that everyone gets on and orders a copy of your book. I can't wait to read it myself. We're so thankful to have you. Kelly's showing a picture of the front of the book now. She started reading it already. I'm jealous. But if you want to help us in our fundraising efforts, you can go to goldribbon-kids.org or nationalpcf.org. We're going to link all of our contact information and all Steve's information in the show notes. As always, keep fighting the unexpected fights. See you later.
Thank you.